The dining room glowed with a warm, golden light, the flicker of candle flames dancing off the crystal glassware and silver cutlery. A delicate aroma of rosemary and garlic wafted from the roast lamb centerpiece, paired with a bouquet of fresh red roses resting in a vase on the table. It was their 5th wedding anniversary, and Emma had spent the entire day planning a perfect evening for her husband David. "Happy anniversary," baby Emma said with a smile, her voice tinged with genuine warmth as she placed the last dish on the table. David walked into the room, impeccably dressed in a navy suit. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew the world respected or feared him. His deep-set blue eyes met Emma's, and he smiled, but the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "Looks perfect," he said, his voice smooth but devoid of enthusiasm. Emma noticed it, as she often did, the faint detachment, the glimmer of something unreadable in his gaze. But tonight, she chose to push the thought aside. It was their anniversary, a chance to rekindle what she felt had been slipping through her fingers over the years. As they sat down to eat, the conversation started light and pleasant. David complimented her cooking, though his comments felt rehearsed. She told him about a funny story from work, but his laugh sounded hollow. "So," Emma said cautiously, sensing an underlying tension, "did you get a chance to open my gift?" David's knife paused mid-slice through the lamb, his jaw tightening for a fleeting moment. "I did," he said, his tone neutral. "A watch. Nice choice. It's engraved," Emma added, her voice softening as she explained, "the date of our wedding. I thought it'd remind you of what," he interrupted sharply, looking up at her. Emma's heart sank, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "Of how far we've come," she finished quietly. David leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the table. 5 years, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "It feels longer." The words hung in the air like an invisible slap. Emma's chest tightened, but she forced a smile. "Well, I suppose marriage does that sometimes," she replied, attempting to lighten the mood. David didn't laugh. Instead, he picked up his wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid, as though lost in thought. The night carried on, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She caught subtle cues, a shadow of impatience when she spoke, a tightness in his jaw when she asked about his day. As she cleared the plates, Emma noticed David standing by the window, staring out into the night. His shoulders were rigid, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. David turned, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Just thinking." "About what, us?" The word landed heavily, and Emma felt her stomach twist. "David, if there's something wrong." "Not tonight, Emma," he said sharply, cutting her off. Her breath caught. David's temper had always been a slow burn, controlled and calculated. But tonight there was an edge she couldn't ignore, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. When he finally turned back to her, his face softened, but only slightly. "Let's just finish the evening," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of warning. Emma nodded, her smile tight. She told herself she was imagining things, that she was just overanalyzing his mood like she often did. But the lingering chill in the room told her otherwise. Later, as they sat in the living room, the conversation drifted to mundane topics, but David's responses became increasingly curt. When Emma excused herself to get dessert, she felt his gaze follow her, heavy and unnerving. Standing in the kitchen, Emma steadied her breathing. The anniversary had been her chance to mend the growing cracks in their relationship, to recapture the love they once had. But tonight, those cracks felt more like gaping chasms. As she carried the dessert tray back to the living room, Emma caught sight of David's reflection in the glass cabinet. He wasn't seated on the couch where she'd left him. He was standing by the mantelpiece, his back to her. And in his hand, she saw a flash of steel, a knife. Her heart stopped, the tray trembling in her hands. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned slowly, the knife catching the dim light. His expression was calm, almost serene, but his eyes burned with an intensity she'd never seen before. "Happy anniversary," he said, his lips curling into a chilling smile. Emma froze in place, her breath caught in her throat. The knife in David's hand was no ordinary kitchen utensil, it was her favorite chef's knife, the one she used daily, the one he had gifted her for Christmas last year. "David," she said cautiously, setting the dessert tray down on the coffee table, "why are you holding that?" He tilted his head, the chilling smile still painted on his face. "Why not? It's a beautiful piece, isn't it? Sharp, precise, just like you always wanted." Her mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Maybe this was some sick joke, a prank he thought was funny. But the intensity in his eyes made her realize this was anything but a joke. "Okay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "If you're trying to scare me, you've succeeded. Put it down now." David took a step closer, and Emma instinctively took a step back. "Scare you," he said, his tone mocking. "Why would I want to scare my beautiful wife on our anniversary? That would be cruel, wouldn't it?" Her heart thundered in her chest. David, you're not yourself. Let's just sit down and talk. Talk, his voice snapped, his calm veneer cracking. He lunged forward, slamming the knife down into the armrest of the couch. Emma flinched, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. Talk is all we've ever done, Emma. And where has that gotten us? The room felt like it was closing in on her. She tried to maintain eye contact, though her legs trembled beneath her. What are you talking about? If you're angry, we can work through it. I'm here, David. You're here, he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping him. You're always here, aren't you? Perfect Emma, always trying to fix things, always trying to save me from myself. His words sliced through her, sharper than the knife he wielded. For years, she had ignored the signs, hoping that the man she fell in love with would resurface the caring, gentle David who once wrote her love letters and brought her coffee in bed. David, please. No, you listen to me for once, he barked, his voice echoing in the silent room. You think you're so perfect, don't you? Always trying to control everything, always judging me. Do you even know what it's like to feel like a prisoner in your own life? To be stuck with someone who thinks they're better than you? Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I never thought I was better than you, she whispered. I loved you, David. I still do. His expression softened for a brief moment, but the darkness quickly returned. Loved me, he said with a sneer. You think love is enough? Love doesn't fix resentment, Emma. It doesn't fix the lies we tell ourselves to keep this charade going. Her chest tightened, a mix of fear and heartbreak swirling within her. If you feel this way, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't we talk before it came to this? David chuckled humorlessly, pulling the knife from the couch and examining it like a craftsman admiring his work. Because talking doesn't solve anything. Actions do. Before she could react, he lunged forward, the blade glinting in the dim light. Emma stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding his strike. She ran toward the kitchen, her instincts screaming for her to put distance between them. Emma, David called after her, his voice eerily calm. Where are you going? You wanted to talk, didn't you? Her trembling hands fumbled for her phone on the counter, but as she reached for it, David appeared in the doorway, blocking her path. You're not calling anyone, he said, his voice low and menacing. David, stop this, she pleaded, her voice shaking. Please, we can work through this. Whatever's going on, we can fix it. Fix it, he laughed, the sound sending chills down her spine. Emma, you don't get it. This is the fix. This is me taking control for once, summoning every ounce of courage. Emma grabbed the first thing she could find, a heavy cast iron skillet, and held it up defensively. Don't come any closer, she warned, her voice firmer than she felt. David paused, his expression shifting to one of amusement. You're going to hit me, Emma. After everything we've been through. If you don't stop, I will, she said, gripping the skillet tighter. For a moment, neither of them moved, the tension in the air so thick it was suffocating. Then, without warning, David lunged again. Emma swung the skillet with all her might, the impact sending him staggering backward. The knife clattered to the floor, and Emma wasted no time. She grabbed her phone and sprinted toward the front door, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind her, she heard David groan, followed by the sound of his footsteps. Emma, he shouted, his voice filled with rage. She threw open the door and ran into the night, her bare feet pounding against the cold pavement. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. The only thought in her mind was escape. As she reached the edge of the driveway, she turned to see David standing in the doorway, his silhouette illuminated by the porch light. This isn't over, he yelled, his voice echoing into the darkness. Emma's chest heaved as she stared back at him, her tears blurring the image of the man she once loved. At that moment, she knew her life would never be the same. The icy night air clawed at Emma's skin as she ran down the street, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know where she was going, she just knew she had to get away. Her bare feet ached against the rough asphalt, and tears blurred her vision. She reached the corner of the block and leaned against a lamppost, clutching her phone with trembling hands. Her mind was a chaotic whirlwind of fear, anger, and disbelief. Emma dialed the one person she knew would answer, no matter the hour. Hello? Came a groggy voice on the other end. Claire, Emma sobbed, her voice barely audible. I need your help. The voice immediately sharpened with concern. Emma, what's wrong? Are you okay? I'm not safe, Emma whispered, glancing back over her shoulder. She half expected to see David coming after her, his shadow stretching across the dimly lit street. David tried to hurt me. There was a pause, and then Claire's voice turned resolute. Where are you? Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you. 15 minutes later, headlights pierced the darkness as Claire's car pulled up beside her. Emma collapsed into the passenger seat, her body shaking uncontrollably. Jesus, Emma, Claire said, her eyes wide as she took in her friend's disheveled appearance. What happened? Emma struggled to find the words. He had a knife. He came at me, I don't even know why. He said horrible things like he hated me, like I was the problem. Claire's grip on the steering wheel tightened. That bastard. You're staying with me tonight. We'll figure everything out in the morning. The drive to Claire's apartment felt surreal, like Emma was floating outside of her own body. She replayed the events of the evening over and over in her mind, each detail sharper and more painful than the last. How had things escalated so quickly? How had the man she loved turned into a monster? At Claire's apartment, Emma sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a steaming cup of tea untouched in her hands. Claire paced in front of her, phone in hand. You need to call the police, Claire said firmly. Emma shook her head. I can't. What if they don't believe me? He's charming. He knows how to twist things, how to make himself look innocent. Claire knelt in front of her, her hands resting on Emma's knees. Emma, listen to me. You are not crazy. What he did to you is not okay. You need to protect yourself. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks as she nodded reluctantly. You're right. I feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner. Claire squeezed her hands. This isn't your fault. Abusers don't show their true colors right away. They manipulate you and make you doubt yourself. But you're stronger than this, Emma. You can get through it. The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of Claire on the phone. She sat up, the events of the previous night crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Who are you talking to? Emma asked when Claire ended the call. My brother, Claire said. He's a lawyer. He's going to help you file a restraining order. Emma's stomach churned. David will fight it. He'll say I'm overreacting, or that I'm lying. Let him try, Claire said fiercely. The important thing is that you protect yourself. Meanwhile, David was busy crafting his version of the story. He called Emma's mother first. I'm worried about Emma, he said, his voice tinged with concern. She's been acting unstable lately. She ran out of the house last night in the middle of dinner. I don't know what's going on with her. Emma's mother, unaware of the situation, was quick to defend him. That doesn't sound like Emma. She's always been so grounded. I know, David said, sighing heavily. But she's been under a lot of stress. I think she might need help. The seed of doubt was planted, just as David intended. He knew Emma would tell people what happened, and he was determined to discredit her before she had the chance. Emma, meanwhile, began taking the first steps toward reclaiming her life. With Claire's support, she filed a police report and started the process of obtaining a restraining order. The officer who took her statement was kind but neutral, asking for as many details as possible. As she recounted the events, Emma's voice trembled, but she forced herself to stay strong. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run, she said, her eyes welling with tears. You did the right thing, the officer assured her. We'll make sure he knows he can't come near you. That evening, Emma sat with Claire, her emotions swinging between fear and determination. I can't believe he called my mom, Emma said, scrolling through the texts her mother had sent her. They were filled with thinly veiled accusations, questioning her mental state and urging her to talk to David. Claire scoffed. Classic gaslighting. He's trying to make everyone think you're the problem so he can keep control. Emma clenched her fists. I'm done letting him control me. He's not going to get away with this. For the first time in days, a flicker of resolve ignited in her chest. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to make sure David paid for what he had done. And this time, she wouldn't back down. Emma stood in Claire's kitchen, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Days had passed since she filed the police report, but the fear lingered, a shadow that clung to her every thought. She hadn't been back to her house since that night, and she wasn't sure if she ever could. Any word on the restraining order? Claire asked, breaking the silence. Emma nodded. They approved it. David's been served. Claire gave a satisfied nod. Good. That's a start. But Emma knew it wasn't enough. David was clever, manipulative, and used to getting his way. She doubted a piece of paper would stop him if he was determined to make her suffer. The first twist came when Emma went back to her house to collect her things. She hadn't wanted to go alone, so Claire's brother, Alex, accompanied her. As they approached the front door, Emma's stomach churned. The house looked the same as always, neatly trimmed hedges, a welcome mat at the door, but it felt different now. The place that had once been her sanctuary was now a site of terror. Emma unlocked the door and stepped inside cautiously, her heart pounding. She expected to find signs of David's anger, broken furniture, shattered glass, but everything was disturbingly normal. Let's make this quick, Alex said, his tone protective. As Emma packed a bag with essentials, Alex wandered into the study. Moments later, he called out to her. Emma, you need to see this. She hurried to the study, finding Alex holding a thick stack of papers. What is it? She asked. Bank statements, Alex said, flipping through the pages. There are transfers here you probably didn't authorize. Emma frowned, taking the papers from him. As she scanned the documents, her confusion turned to anger. David had been siphoning money from their joint account into a private one for months, possibly years. That son of a Emma started, but her voice broke. She clutched the papers tightly, the realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. David hadn't just tried to hurt her physically, he had been sabotaging her financially all along. This could be useful, Alex said, his voice steady. If he's been hiding money, it strengthens your case against him. Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. He's not getting away with this. The next discovery came a week later when Emma received a call from the officer handling her case. Miss Lawson, we've reviewed your statement and the evidence you provided. There's something you should know, the officer said. What is it? Emma asked, gripping the phone tightly. We ran a background check on your husband. It seems this isn't the first time he's been accused of violence. Emma's blood ran cold. What do you mean? There was a previous incident with an ex-girlfriend, the officer explained. She reported him for harassment and threats, but the case was dropped. Lack of evidence. Emma's mind raced. David had never mentioned an ex-girlfriend, let alone one who accused him of such behavior. Do you have her name? Legally, we can't disclose that, the officer said, but I'd recommend speaking to your lawyer. They might be able to find out more. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma hired a private investigator. The investigator worked quickly, and within days, he provided Emma with a name, Jessica Monroe. Jessica was living 2 towns over, working as a graphic designer. Emma hesitated before contacting her, but ultimately decided she needed answers. When Jessica agreed to meet, Emma felt a mix of relief and trepidation. They met at a quiet cafe, sitting in a secluded corner. You're brave for reaching out, Jessica said, her expression somber. Not many women do. I didn't know about you, Emma admitted. David never told me. Jessica smiled bitterly. Of course he didn't. He's good at hiding who he really is. As they talked, Emma learned that Jessica's story mirrored her own. David had been charming and attentive at first, but over time, his true nature surfaced: jealousy, manipulation, and eventually violence. I tried to leave him, Jessica said, her voice tinged with regret. But he made sure I couldn't. He ruined my credit, spread lies about me, and even made me lose my job. Emma felt a surge of anger on Jessica's behalf. Why didn't you press charges? Jessica sighed. I tried, but he's smart. He knows how to cover his tracks and make himself look like the victim. Armed with this new information, Emma began piecing together a plan. She compiled everything she had: bank statements, testimony from Jessica, and evidence of David's escalating behavior. I'm not just protecting myself anymore, Emma told Claire one evening. I'm protecting every woman he might target in the future. David, meanwhile, was busy trying to regain control of the narrative. He called mutual friends, painting Emma as erratic and unstable. He even showed up unannounced at her workplace, though security quickly escorted him out. The final straw came when Emma received an anonymous email. It contained photos of her and Claire leaving the courthouse, accompanied by a chilling message: you can run, but you can't hide. Emma forwarded the email to the police and the private investigator. The investigator traced the email to a burner account, but the timing and content left no doubt in Emma's mind it was from David. As the pieces fell into place, Emma's fear began to transform into something else: determination. David had underestimated her, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. This ends now, she said to Claire one evening, her voice steady. What are you planning? Claire asked cautiously. Emma's lips curled into a grim smile. I'm taking my life back. The tension was rising, and Emma knew the confrontation was inevitable, but this time she would be ready. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers and the low hum of tension. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table, her back straight and her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from her, David lounged in his chair, the picture of arrogant confidence. His smirk sent a wave of anger through Emma, but she pushed it down. She had prepared for this moment, and she wasn't going to let him win. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Julia, leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. The evidence is solid, and his arrogance will be his downfall." Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the judge. This was at the culmination of weeks of fear, planning, and sheer determination. The day had started with a twist Emma hadn't anticipated. Jessica Monroe had arrived at the courthouse unannounced, a folder of documents in hand. I couldn't stay silent anymore, Jessica said, her voice trembling but resolute. The documents were emails and text messages from David, threats, and admissions that painted a damning picture of his abusive tendencies. Combined with Emma's evidence, they created an airtight case. Jessica's arrival was a lifeline Emma hadn't expected but desperately needed. Now, as the proceedings unfolded, David's calm demeanor began to crack. Julia presented the evidence with surgical precision. bank records showing David's secret transfers, Jessica's testimony and corroborating messages. The anonymous email was traced back to David's burner account. When Jessica took the stand, her voice rang clear and unwavering. She recounted her experience with David, painting a chilling picture of his pattern of manipulation and violence. "I stayed silent for years," Jessica said, her gaze meeting Emma's. "But I couldn't let him do this to someone else." David's lawyer attempted to discredit her, bringing up unrelated events from her past, but Jessica stood firm. When Emma took the stand, her heart pounded, but she refused to let fear take over. She described the anniversary night in vivid detail: the knife, the rage in David's eyes, and the terror that had driven her out into the cold, dark street. David's lawyer sneered. "Ms. Lawson, isn't it true that you've been under stress lately? Perhaps your perception of events was exaggerated." Emma met his gaze steadily. "No, it's not true. I know what I saw. And I know what he's capable of." The turning point came during David's testimony. Confident in his charm, he painted himself as the victim of Emma's alleged paranoia and Jessica's supposed vendetta. "I've done nothing but love and support Emma," David said, his tone saccharine. "But sometimes people create their demons." Julia rose from her seat, her eyes cold. "Mr. Lawson, would you consider yourself an honest man?" "Of course," David replied smoothly. Julia smiled tightly. "Then can you explain these?" She handed a series of photos to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. The images, taken by the private investigator, showed David meeting with his lawyer outside the courthouse and slipping him a USB drive. "We subpoenaed this drive this morning," Julia said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "It contains fabricated messages designed to discredit Ms. Lawson. Messages you intended to use as evidence today." David's face turned pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Julia pressed on, her tone relentless. "You've lied under oath, Mr. Lawson. You've tampered with evidence and attempted to intimidate a witness. Your pattern of behavior is clear, and it ends here." The judge's gavel came down hard. "Mr. Lawson, due to the overwhelming evidence against you, I'm issuing a permanent restraining order in favor of Ms. Lawson. Furthermore, the matter of fabricated evidence will be referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges." Emma's breath hitched, tears pricking her eyes. She glanced at Jessica, who gave her a small, supportive nod. As they left the courthouse, Emma felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Claire was waiting for her on the steps, arms outstretched. "You did it," Claire said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I didn't do it alone," Emma replied, glancing at Jessica. Jessica smiled faintly. "You're stronger than you think, Emma. Don't forget that." Later that evening, Emma stood on the balcony of Claire's apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She felt free. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "He's going to face charges. You're safe now." Emma smiled, the message solidifying the sense of closure she desperately needed. She had faced her fears, stood up to her abuser, and reclaimed her life. And she knew one thing for sure: David would never hurt her or anyone else again. Emma stood in the middle of her new apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows. Boxes were piled around her, labeled with scrawled handwriting: kitchen, books, clothes. She breathed in deeply, letting the scent of fresh paint and possibility fill her lungs. This was hers. Not David's. Not theirs. Hers. For the first time in years, Emma felt like she was in control of her life. The scars from her ordeal were still there, invisible to the eye but etched deeply in her heart. Yet, those scars no longer defined her. They were marks of survival, reminders of her strength and resilience. In the weeks since the court ruling, Emma had been working on rebuilding her life. She'd closed the joint accounts David had drained and opened new ones in her name. She found a job at a local nonprofit, helping women who had faced similar struggles. It was emotionally taxing, but also deeply fulfilling. One afternoon at work, Emma was organizing a donation drive when she spotted Jessica in the crowd. "You came," Emma said, her voice warm. Jessica shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You inspired me. I figured it's time I started giving back too." They spent the afternoon sorting clothes and chatting, their bond deepening with each shared story. Emma realized that while her journey had been painful, it had also brought people like Jessica into her life, people who understood her in ways others couldn't. Claire remained a steadfast presence, her unwavering support a constant reminder of the power of friendship. One evening, as they shared a celebratory bottle of wine in Emma's new apartment, Claire raised her glass. "To you," Claire said, her eyes shining. "To starting over, to being stronger than ever, and to never letting anyone dim your light again." Emma clinked her glass against Claire's, her heart swelling with gratitude. "To all of us," she said. "To finding our voices and our power." But the most profound transformation was within Emma herself. She began therapy, unpacking the years of manipulation and fear that David had inflicted. Each session peeled back a layer, revealing the vibrant, passionate woman she had been before his shadow loomed over her. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Her first piece was a vibrant abstract in bold reds and yellows, symbolizing the fire she had rediscovered within herself. When she posted the painting on social media, the response was overwhelming. Old friends reached out, marveling at her work and reconnecting with her. It reminded Emma of the world beyond the walls David had tried to cage her in. One day, as she walked through the park near her apartment, Emma paused by a bench overlooking a small pond. She sat down, watching the ducks glide across the water, their ripples creating endless patterns. Her phone buzzed with a message from Julia. David accepted a plea deal. He's serving time. Justice is served. Emma stared at the message, her chest tightening. She thought she'd feel a surge of triumph, but instead she felt a calm, quiet sense of finality. Justice wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming her life, and she had already done that. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. As the weeks turned into months, Emma found herself laughing more, dreaming bigger, and walking taller. She realized that she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. The shadows of her past hadn't disappeared, but they no longer consumed her. Instead, they stood as reminders of her journey, proof that she had endured and emerged stronger. Standing in her apartment one evening, Emma looked at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, she recognized the woman staring back at her. "You did it," she whispered to herself, and she had. Emma's story wasn't just about survival, but about transformation, resilience, and rediscovering her strength. Her past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She was free. She was whole. She was ready for whatever came next. And most importantly, she was finally herself again.